All right, picture this. What if I told you that a completely absurd, seemingly random internet spat, literally just a YouTube creator and a commenter going at it over a meme, was actually masking a massive, profound structural battle over the very future of human governance? I know it sounds totally crazy, but as we unpack the layers of this conflict today, you're going to see exactly how an argument over a video is actually a proxy war for the architecture of our digital and physical realities.
Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to take a strictly neutral, really forensic look at two wildly competing geopolitical worldviews that are colliding in real time. We'll be analyzing the systems, the philosophies, and the underlying code that are quietly being built all around us while we're distracted by our feeds. Here's a quick roadmap for this Explainer. We'll start with a bizarre digital clash, then look at the critic versus the architect. After that, we'll dive into the empire and the republic, the algorithmic banality of evil, engineering legal abundance, and finally, wrap it up with the mechatronic fork. Let's get right into it.
Starting off with Section 1, a bizarre digital clash.
So this whole thing actually kicked off when a British sci-fi critic, Damien Walter, issued a pretty standard 48-hour copyright threat over a piece of digital content. Now, usually this just ends with someone claiming fair use or quietly editing the clip. But that is definitely not what happened here. The guy on the receiving end of this threat, Kyle McLean-Smith, met this routine institutional procedure with a massive and frankly jarring escalation.
Yeah, Smith fired back with what's been called an MI6 and 1776 response. He literally invoked the U.S. First Amendment. He wasn't treating this as some mundane intellectual property dispute. No, he framed it as a direct defense of national sovereignty against imperial capture. He drew a hard line in the sand, treating a simple copyright strike as a hostile act of foreign operational subversion. To really grasp why on earth he'd do that, we need to look at who these two guys actually are.
Which brings us to Section 2, the critic versus the architect.
Fundamentally, we are looking at a huge structural divide here. On one side, you have Damien Walter. Think of him as a special forces librarian. His entire toolkit revolves around top-down institutional storytelling and building 21st century mythos. In fact, Smith argues that Walter's storytelling is essentially a narrative soma, a pacifying drug designed to keep the public distracted with literary debates. But then on the flip side, you have Kyle McLean-Smith, the systems architect. His approach is completely bottom-up. He doesn't care about the stories. His focus is entirely on mathematically grounded infrastructure and hard executable code.
Looking at this comparison, you can see how both men define the ultimate threat to human liberty. They're both incredibly concerned with invisible systems of power, just from totally opposite angles. Walter is sounding the alarm on capitalist tech elites building this sort of ideological tech feudalism. He points right at figures like Peter Thiel, who supposedly fears a totalitarian state, but at the exact same time funds Palantir, which is quite literally the global surveillance architecture a totalitarian state would use. But then contrast that with Smith. He sees the threat in a completely different light. For him, the real danger is the systemic, foreign operational capture of national sovereignty. He sees institutional legal threats and heavy bureaucracy as the primary weapons used to suppress independent thought.
Moving on to Section 3, the empire and the republic.
Okay, bear with me here. Look at this image. This is a 3D reconstruction from Penn State researchers, and it shows an ant's muscle completely surrounded by zombie ant fungal cells. What scientists found here is wild. This parasite completely takes over the ant's body, essentially turning it into a fungus wearing an ant suit. But, and this is the absolute crucial part, it never actually breaches the ant's brain. It controls the host from the outside in, peripherally, pulling the muscle strings like a microscopic puppeteer. And this is the exact biological metaphor for Smith's theory of institutional capture. The host gets hijacked without the brain ever officially being invaded.
And honestly, this scales up perfectly into our history and our myths. Think about the Galactic Empire in Star Wars, or even the actual history of Rome. The Empire didn't just show up from the outside and conquer the Republic in some dramatic blazing war. No, as analysts point out, the Republic became the Empire. People like Augustus Caesar or Emperor Palpatine, they didn't destroy the Senate, they hollowed it out from the inside. They kept all the old vocabulary of freedom and the outward appearance of a republic, but the actual power, that peripheral control, was entirely centralized. The shell is still there, but the host is hijacked.
That takes us to Section 4, the algorithmic banality of evil. Right now, today, we are witnessing what you can really only call the Kafkaesque banality of evil. When people try to make profound, structural, or even prophetic proclamations online,
The digital platforms don't evaluate the ideas. They evaluate the content strictly through behavioral and language guidelines. If a message uses heavy repetition, intense formatting, or adversarial language, which, by the way, are the exact tools historically used to disrupt cultural elites, the algorithms just mechanically flag it as spam or harassment. It's an excuse Kafka wouldn't even accept. You aren't being suppressed for your ideas. You're being suppressed because your text formatting triggered a primitive piece of binary code.
So the really crucial takeaway here is that this suppression isn't necessarily some malicious top-down conspiracy. It's actually a tragic byproduct of engineering for scale. In legal terms, it's called an indirect tort harm. To manage billions of comments every single day, platforms have to rely on blunt code that absolutely cannot feel spiritual urgency or nuance. So by filtering out anything that looks like noise, these systems accidentally create this incredibly sterile digital environment. They are systematically deleting the exact kind of friction that we actually need to spark human intellectual and spiritual growth.
Next up, Section 5, Engineering Legal Abundance.
Now, how does the architect fight back? While Smith takes a concept straight from computer science called acceleration-driven clause learning, or ADCL, and he applies it directly to legal engineering. Think about traditional bureaucracy and institutional gatekeepers for a second. They're like sawdust in the gears, right? Expensive, incredibly slow, and practically designed to extract wealth. Well, Smith uses ADCL logic to mathematically collapse an impossibly long, say 10,000 one-step bureaucratic proof, down to just 3 steps. He is literally engineering what he calls pure legal abundance. The whole goal is to replace that institutional sawdust with the frictionless grease of auditable network contracts.
And look, we know he actually has the functional authority to do this. This isn't just some abstract theory. Smith holds U.S. Patent 12,664,142 for something called the seed tree database. This system literally unifies the data and the script into reproducing automata, creating this living, growing digital organism. And to make sure it doesn't just crash into a static loop, he grounds the whole system in integer sequences, specifically OEIS 8328604, which allows for non-terminating organic growth. What does that mean in plain English? Basically, he's building decentralized systems that use pure mathematics to outmaneuver static, centralized power. It's pretty wild.
Finally, Section 6, the Mechatronic Fork.
So, it all comes down to this. We are facing what Smith calls the Mechatronic Fork. And we have to look really starkly at the 2 totally distinct digital realities that are currently being constructed all around us. On one hand, we have auditable freedom. This is powered by free and open source software, distributed systems, and totally transparent peer-to-peer code. On the other hand, we have centralized servitude, an opaque monoculture driven by elite narratives, heavy surveillance, and algorithmic pacification.
These are the absolute stakes here. We can go down a path defined by institutional mythos, where we're essentially just pacified by the stories told by special forces librarians as we slowly decline into text feudalism. Or we take the path of executable architecture, where systems architects actually engineer a structural escape route into a decentralized, mathematically grounded reality. It genuinely matters that we pay close attention to who is writing the rules of our digital lives right now, because this choice is actively being coded into existence as we speak.
So, I want to leave you with this final, really provocative thought to chew on. As these invisible systems of control just keep growing more powerful, and the hollowed-out shell of our republic continues to mask the empire creeping inside, which path of the Mechatronic Fork will you choose to walk down? Are we moving toward auditable freedom, or are we quietly drifting into centralized servitude masked by really good storytelling? Keep questioning the systems being built around you.